a settlement with the owners corporation for, as I said, multiple millions of dollars, but I can't tell you how much. The OC, notwithstanding that they got a nice big payout and could go and get on with doing these works, the OC continues litigation. And in fact issues proceedings against 36 parties, of which they only eventually ended up continuing against 5. They disputed the appointment of the administrator, didn't like the administrator for ICON, wanted someone else in, so they went to court, and continued to litigate. And I guess it's fair to say that one of the frustrations that David had with this was that they continued to spend money on lawyers when they got a decent payout and could get going on the rectification of defects, bearing in mind now that it's now 7 years since the OC was issued. Next slide. The kinds of excuses that were raised on the defects, and the report sort of goes into the range of defects there. The certifier or the fire authorities had approved it, so it must be compliant. You know, those balustrades were signed off. We've got an OC, nothing to see here, can't possibly be non-compliant when someone signed off on it. Or, you know, well, yes, that doesn't meet DTS, but we could deal with that under performance, surely. Let's just retrospectively performance that issue away. Another very common abuse of our performance-based code. And then, well, the balustrade must be okay because the same kind of system's been used in over 5,000 apartments in Sydney. Well, that's probably true, which is very unfortunate. And as I mentioned before, the builder talked about this litigation culture in New South Wales being quite extraordinary. So yeah, sure, there's some defects, but hey, we build buildings like this everywhere in Australia and we don't end up in court. Ratcliffe, the waterproofing engineer, he had a very, very strong view that all of these defects could have been resolved, ought to have been the way that the balconies and the balustrades were being put together should have been discovered during construction as being defective. Someone should have pulled these people up. This was not something that was that should have been able to get through the processes and the oversight. Next slide. This is just a couple of photos of, you know, there were some issues with fire safety features. The balconies were the main issue and the main source of cost. It also happened that they had alcoholic FR combustible cladding on the building, which wasn't great. But luckily it was the alcoholic FR version, which is, you know, relatively safe. It certainly doesn't propagate fire in the same way that 100% PE does. Next slide. So key issues. These people had not used their balconies since 2019 when I wrote that report, and they're still not using them. And that's a long time to go without using your balcony because of the council's involvement and the orders. Very limited rectification in the 6 years up to when I did my report. There was, you know, the builder argued that they did try to come back, they weren't allowed on site, and that they were doing rectification work, but the owners said, well, they didn't turn up, and when they did, they never did it properly, all the stuff you're used to hearing. The builders structuring, I mean, I think that was one of the things that I found really interesting. Before the job was over, they had restructured themselves, they still existed, they weren't earning any money, and they just sat ready to switch the lights off when they were ready and go into external administration. And I think this is pretty common and pretty unfortunate that there is a practice out there to structure yourself away from responsibility if the heat gets too hot. And that's what occurs. And often it's many, many years later when owners have spent millions of dollars on lawyers and consultants like you guys in this room. And there's this big sort of debate, and like I said, I couldn't really tell, but there was a bit of the builder avoiding to come back and do defects, but they were insistent that it was because they were being obstructed by the owner's lawyers who wouldn't let them come back. And so there was this really irreconcilable relationship. Interestingly, Capital could have folded too, because as I mentioned, they were an SPV, so they could easily have walked away from all of this. But of course, had they done that, they would have left their client Hillsong holding the problem, and that would have tarnished their reputation, because, as I said, a lot of their clients were these sorts of community groups that needed the know-how of Capital. So they didn't fold, and they really lent into this and negotiated quite a good settlement for the owners, which was a good outcome. Next slide. More issues. Now, this goes to the point that you raised. What was your name? David. So the certifier charged $41,000 for his services on Otto 2. He did about 10 inspections. And when I interviewed him a couple of times, he said for the same job now, in order to meet the obligations under the certifier's practice standard, he would charge $340,000. So that means his fees have gone from around $300 an apartment to $2,377 an apartment. But he now would do between 30 and 40 inspections. And a lot of those inspections would be joint inspections with architects and engineers and the fire authorities. So a hell of a lot more oversight. And when you compare that to the legal fees that were paid, so the OC's legal and expert fees are around $750,000. This is at the time of the report, when they were still going, which is about $5,200 an apartment. And then if you put together also the legal fees spent by the developer and the builder, because they're all in the litigation, about $2.5 million worth of fees associated. This is just with dispute, nothing to do with rectifying anything. So that works out at about $17,500 an apartment. So the point made by David in the foreword to this report is, sure, it now costs $340,000 for something that costs $41,000, but would you rather pay $2,377 per apartment or $17,500 per apartment for not even get a rectification done? So, of course, assuming that this increased oversight by certifiers and 3 or 4 times the inspections that they would not ordinarily do on a property like this actually reduces the amount of defects and stops this kind of litigation and this sort of business practice, it's a pretty good deal. So that was the point I was making earlier about increased cost. So I think the other sort of key slogan in this was the focus on the fight, not the fix, because once owners are drawn into this and they've handed over so much money to lawyers, they don't know where the end is on that, and all they're focusing on is the fight. No one's letting the builder back to fix anything because we're so sunk financially that we really, can't get over the fight to get on with the fix. And in the meantime, water's ingressing into these apartments and causing more consequential damage years and years on. Next slide. Last slide. And I always want to finish these things with the real drive home point here, the impact on the owners. We had enormous trouble getting owners to talk to us for this case study. We spoke to a lot of the people that I've mentioned throughout, the builder, the directors and other things, different experts. We even spoke to the owners' lawyers twice. We had about 3 hours with them. Really interesting. And when we asked anybody, we couldn't compel anybody to talk to us. It was all purely voluntary. We told them that at the start. We said, anything you tell us might end up in this report unless you say, actually, that bit I don't want in the report. Everything you tell us could end up in the report, and we're naming your name. So if you want to talk to us, that's the basis upon which you do it. And we did get quite a bit of engagement from a number of players in the case study. What we did with the owners was we wrote with the permission of the Owners Corporation Committee, we wrote to all the owners and said, contact us if you would like to speak to us about this and your experience. And I won't say how many contacted us, but very few, when you consider there are 143 apartments, have more than one person living in them. But this is what we gleaned from those that we spoke to, that there was a lack of knowledge amongst owners. They're very confused and they rely heavily on the experts. And when I say experts, I'm talking about their strata manager, their lawyers, and the consultants that come along to help them, because they really don't know what they've got themselves into when this happens. Decisions get made for them all the time. The Owners Corporation Committee is a pretty small group of the 143 lot owners, and they make decisions for them with the lawyers. They have these town hall meetings where options are presented, but actually they don't understand the difference between options, and when they ask questions, they're spoken to in a very dismissive way by their own lawyers, was what we were told. Never knowing how much this is going to cost us, how long is this going to go on for, and will we ever get our building fixed, and it still leaks when it rains. A mixture of disinterest and when we sort of talked about with the Owners Corporation Committee the extent to which other lot owners were involved, well, no, there's a real disinterest, people don't turn up. But then we heard others say, well, actually, I wasn't on the committee and I wanted some more information about what was going on, and when I asked for it, I wasn't given it. So a real sort of variation in experiences of owners. They were totally shocked when ICON went insolvent, did not know that that could happen, did not know what that meant when that happened, because they'd already spent $750,000 on this litigation, and all of a sudden there's no builder anymore. And the government's involvement, there were some really mixed views. As I said, David tried a couple of times to intervene in this project, and initially he was fobbed off quite strongly. A lot of the owners were very cautious. They were very upset with the council, preventing them from using the balconies. At one point, the council actually was going to issue them with orders that they had to shut the doors on their balconies. They couldn't even open the door to get fresh air in because of the risk. They had to fix the doors shut. And people were like, but that's our main source of ventilation in here. So there was a lot of, I guess, disappointment and scepticism about government helping. But ultimately, there was a really lovely letter which I published in the report with the permission of this owner after the settlement, thanking the Commissioner for stepping in, because they didn't believe that they would have had this sort of resolution or some sort of intervention without his involvement. And they were very grateful. And of course, the time, you know, when I asked them, aside from the money, what other impacts? Well, all of our time, the time we spend, our personal time, voluntarily having to deal with these issues on behalf of a large group of people, the pressure to make decisions for people, and then when you do and you think you're doing the right thing, they don't agree with the decision that you've made. And so the anxiety that you feel living in your own apartment with people in the lift that maybe didn't agree with the decision that you made because you're on the committee. And mostly, you know, they were very, very upset about this report being published because of the potential value impact on their property. Because we were naming the development, we weren't naming individual lot owners. And David thought very long and hard about that. And he's taken a very sort of strong view about this in his approach in New South Wales, because one of the reasons why all this stuff is so hidden is because of the impact on value of apartments and owners wanting to quickly sell their apartment or brush these things under the carpet. And of course, it's not just owners, it's purchasers that unknowingly buy into these things when there's been enormous amounts of information about problems in the building and that isn't passed on as part of the sale process. And just never knowing how much more money they were going to have to find or when this would be over. So enormous, incredible impacts on owners. They're at the behest of these experts who build business models around this whole industry in New South Wales, and I'm sure it happens here as well. So that, on that note, I'll conclude. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. Fascinating. I don't even work in this field and I find it fascinating, so it was great. We've had questions previously as well. The night is getting on, so we're probably limited to about 10 minutes total. So two things: if you have a question, say it so both rooms can hear it, and no comments. Just if you can't formulate it into a question, then chat to Bronwyn or someone else later on, but get right to the point. So I'll take the first one because I can. This is something I foreshadowed with Bronwyn the other day. Has anyone seen this document which Engineers Australia issued? It was March last year, but they put an email out about it a little while ago. a guide for design engineers and building certifiers. Collaborate for a better future. That's a document they've issued, which they've said has been as a result of some of the recommendations in the Building Confidence Report. And one of the points they make in this is that when it comes to certifying design, that essentially anything to do with certification under the regulations, that's what building certifiers do. We're not asking engineers to certify. They don't have any certifying regulated duties under the regulations. I don't agree, but anyway, I'd just like to know what you think about that, Bronwyn.
Yeah, I don't agree. Is that just a New South Wales thing, or it's a national thing? Yeah, well, that's rubbish then, isn't it? Right? We know in Victoria that that you can issue certificates, and that's a form of certification.
You have to. You've got to write it on the Form 126.
Yes, yes. And even though I might say there is a bit of a perception that we mandate 126s here, but we don't, of course. But the building surveyor will ask for any building surveyor worth their salt will want a 126 off you, and that's a certification. So I do think that's wrong. I'm not saying necessarily though in other jurisdictions there might not be a 126 type certification, but you'll still be being asked for certificates wherever you are. I'm sure you will on your design and on any inspections that you do.
And it's not just enough, say from a structural engineering point of view, to say, well, I'm certified as complying with AS 3600, that's the concrete structure standard, but you have to say that it actually complies with the National Construction Code, the NCC, so you've got to be conversant with that. This report is saying, no, building certifiers do that, you engineers don't have to do it.
Yeah.
So just to wrap that up, I actually put in a complaint about this.
Yeah.
Which was all gone on deaf ears 2 weeks ago. So I don't know what's going to happen. That was to their main policy department in Canberra.
Yeah.
So I'll see what happens there, but I thought that was pretty poor, so thank you. All right, any other questions at all? Straight to the point, please. Yeah, big voice, big voice.
I had a question about the practice standards
Louder.
in New South Wales at the moment. Do you get a feel for the other jurisdictions if they're all wondering, oh, what's going to happen when we bring it in too? Or?
Yeah, great question.
Too late.
So one of the things we recommended in BCR was a code of conduct for certifiers. And in particular, because we had a number of recs that went to that whole conflict of interest issue that underlies private certification in Australia. And a number of the jurisdictions have said, and not just in response to our report, but since our report, well, there really should be a code for everybody. But there are codes, lots of codes of conduct for engineers. Believe me, I've looked at all of them and tried to reconcile them. But this is a whole nother level. And when we recommended code of conduct, there was this sort of question about, well, what does that look like? In my head, I thought a code of conduct was not just, here's 10 things on a page. You'd be honest and have integrity and act within your competency in your own, area of competency, all those ones we know about, comply with all laws. That actually it was more than that, and it should actually be examples related to the practice of that particular occupation that go with those principles around codes of conduct. And so I was sort of thinking something more like a practice standard, and probably we should have used that term. And what ended up happening in Victoria when they did the Building Surveyor Code of Conduct is actually about a 30-page document that's got lots of examples in it. And I was involved in writing that Code of Conduct. And that's what I had in mind, that it wouldn't just be these motherhood statements that we see. So I think what New South Wales has done with this is really great, because they also have a code of conduct and for building surveyors, but they've got now these practice standards which actually go into the practice of that profession and call out different behaviour, force expectations. So no other jurisdiction's doing it yet, but I am raising it when I am speaking to different clients in other jurisdictions. So I think it would be great. I think it would be unfortunate if we have 8 different ones, which we're prone to in this country. And it would be great if others do adopt it, that they follow something really quite similar. That would be fabulous.
Thank you. Another one. A question for this end of the room. Question for Bronwyn?
Just a quick question, Bronwyn.
Just give me the microphone.
Just with that case study, did they have to raise a special levy to pay the legal fees, or was
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was quick and easy. Another one from down here. Any questions? Yes. Here we go. See if this works from down there.
What order of magnitude do you believe that professional indemnity insurance will increase?
Well, do you know what? one of the biggest advocates of the Building Confidence Report is the insurance industry. They have been begging the governments to implement the BCR, and so they ought to be happy about this kind of stuff. There might be, what really got on my goat when the Design Building Practitioners Act was coming in, and they had parliamentary inquiry was going on in New South Wales into the building industry, and the insurance industry came along and they said, we don't support this design practitioners thing. We're not going to provide professional indemnity insurance for all these design practitioners. And I thought, how bloody dare you? You're going around saying that you want BCR to be implemented, which called for designers to be registered across the country because of their important role in the process. And if we have more registered practitioners in more categories and they all need PI, isn't that a good thing for the insurance industry to spread the risk and get more premiums? So yes, you can see why people raise insurance, and I'm sure it was raised in the creation of that practice standard as being something that's going to go through the roof as a result of this. But the whole idea is about improving competency, lifting standards, and having less need to claim on your insurance policy. So I think if there is a sort of a short-term response that's negative, then that's really disappointing. But ultimately, this is about preventing and reducing defects, and therefore the insurers having to pay out on those risks.
Another one from this end. Probably got another 2 questions to go. Yes, please.
Has the changes to the legislation in New South Wales resulted in better outcomes, less defects and better build quality? Is there any quantitative data about it?
Okay, so yes, there is. What the Commission did in 2021, they did a report, a benchmarking report with Strata Communities New South Wales, where they asked a bunch of questions around the prevalence of defects in Class 2 buildings. They redid that report in 2023, and in the 21 report, it said that there were 39% of buildings had serious defects as to the definition under the RAB Act. The report from 2023, that went up to 51%. Now, you'd have to think, oh, it's getting worse, not better. There's a couple of reasons why that would have gone up, because I think the problem is this whole brushed under the carpet thing, and so not wanting to call out the defects or confirm you've got defects in your property. So I think the increase is partly to do with greater awareness, the coming out of these issues. David's had an enormous social media name and shame approach to his regulation. But what they did in the breakdown of those defects was they had, based on the year the occupancy certificate was issued. And when you look at the table, the 2 years post the 2022 and 2023 year, you start to see the defects coming down. So that's the only piece of data, and they're cautiously optimistic that it's showing that. Anecdotally, there is a lot of evidence, and we've got some New South Wales people in the room who'll be able to talk to that, but that there's a lot of evidence. When in the first year when they were going on building sites under construction and finding issues in bathrooms, they were making them, the developers rip them out. So they go into buildings a couple of months before OC is due, bathrooms are all pretty much done, and they'd go into a bathroom and he'd start tapping his 50-cent coin on things and whatever and say, we think there's some issues in here, and they'd pull up one bathroom and the tiles weren't put properly, the falls weren't right, the membranes weren't thick enough, rip it up. Is this how you did all the bathrooms? Let's go and rip this one up and see. And this one, 250 bathrooms, get them all out of here. He's had over 2,000 bathrooms ripped up in apartments around New South Wales. Now, if that ain't going to give them a message, they no longer see issues in bathrooms in New South Wales when they go and inspect.
Brilliant. Lovely. One last question from this end at all, maybe? No?
No.
Right, well...
You had your hand up a few times, Michael.
Hang on. Oh, I've got to be equitable. Sorry about this. Last one.
You'll get the last say, perhaps, Michael.
Yeah, g'day. How do you think it's best to make legal practitioners accountable in the process?
Oh, wow. great question. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, it's my profession and I hang my head in shame. You know, one of the big takeouts from this report is the behaviour of lawyers involved and the stringing out of owners and the costs involved and the business model. So, look, I don't stick up for any of that, and I think it is an issue. I mean, lawyers will probably tell you, hey, we're not on the tools, we didn't cause these defects, we're just here trying to help owners get compensation and rectify their problems, but they do have a lot to answer for. And this is why David has created things like Project Intervene. So he said any owner's corporation that is in litigation and can't resolve their defects, and if you've still got a builder or a developer and you want my help, put your hand up. This is called Project Intervene. And the Otto case it was the beginnings of Project Intervene. Over 220 odd OCs have come forward for Project Intervene. And I think in the end, it'll probably be close to 100 where there'll still be a builder or a developer. And what's really interesting is a lot of these projects that are going to be resolved through Project Intervene, the builder or the developer has an iCert rating that they don't want to lose.
Is that only in New South Wales?
Yeah. So Michael here is involved in Project Intervene, and you could probably have a whole session on it. But it is working, and they are bringing developers and builders back to these sites and intervening in their litigation processes. And David would love to run all these lawyers out of town, and I think that's a really great objective. Could we have Michael's question, because he's come all the way from Sydney.
Request?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Bronwyn, with the success of the design and building practitioners,
In the microphone, everyone can hear.
sorry, with the success of the Design and Building Practitioners Act in New South Wales, is there a move to introduce it in Victoria and across Australia?
Yes. So the Victorian government has had an expert panel reviewing the building system for about 5 years. They've done 2 reports, and a third one apparently has been put into government, and they've already said in the second report they've recommended to government introducing declared design processes. The ACT government's also looking into it. So off the back, the next phase of their reforms after the developer legislation is looking at introducing registration for other design practitioners, because they have got the engineers and the architects and they want to pick up the others. And also having declared designs. So it's definitely going to be brought in. It's taking a while. WA is bringing it in as well. Wait a While's put out the whole big package of reforms responding to BCR that they say they're going to introduce. We haven't seen any legislation from them yet, but we have seen a big sort of public commitment to it. So yes, Rec 13 is going to come in, which is great.
Thank you. Right, well, while we just wait for Secretary, Past President Patrick to come up with a few concluding remarks and a little gift for our wonderful speaker this evening, I'll just remind everybody that the recording from tonight will be up on the FESA website in the next few days. We are trying to organise it so it's for members only, but I think at the moment anyone can get it, so dive in. So, all right, so Patrick, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Jeff, and thank you so much, Bronwyn. This is our biggest night ever, and I think it's our longest and most informative and most wide-reaching presentation ever, too.
Thank you.
So, if everybody could thank Bronwyn in the usual way.
Thank you.
We have a small token of appreciation.
Lovely.
Thanks so much, Bronwyn.
Thank you. Thanks very